Okay, so I'm seeing a lot of people we know and a lot of new faces. Thank you, everybody. Welcome to coming to this webinar with the NABJ Global Task Force. I am the chair, Aurora Ellis. Today we are trying to, with our webinars, create a space for education, for information for journalists, Black journalists, about the most impactful stories that are happening in the US and around the world. Today we have a very important conversation about Cuba and the crisis that the island is facing with blackouts, massive immigration, a threat of aggression from the United States, and also political repression on the island, and how this affects not only the island, but the surrounding Caribbean region. Today we have a panel of very diverse voices with us, Afro-Cuban journalists, and also a Jamaican journalist who has covered the crisis extensively from a Jamaican perspective. Right now, we are having a few technical difficulties, so we are missing one panelist, but we expect him to come aboard shortly. As for our moderator today, we have Rafael Peña. He is the Director of Communications for the NABJ Global Task Force, and the ambassador for the Black Travel Alliance and the founder of Blux, if I'm pronouncing that
Yeah,
correctly,
you
a
got it.
platform centered on luxury travel, cultural integrity, and impact in the community. His journalism work has appeared in Travel and Leisure, Miami Herald, The Black Enterprise, and other publications. He grew up in the Bronx, um, where he also has been impacted by his living in Europe, America Latina, Asia. He has a global perspective, and he brings a global perspective and a narrative for hospitality, culture, and representation. I also just want to give a big thanks to Kiritiana Freelone, who is the coordinator for this. And just very quickly, I will hand this off to Rafael.
All right, guys. Just want to welcome everyone to our first webinar of the year. And I want to thank these journalists that we have on board. Just a quick introduction. We have Liz Fernandez. You could do a little wave, let everybody know who you are. She is a Havana-based journalist, documentary filmmaker, and co-founder of Belly of the Beast, and also a Gracie Award-winning presenter of The War on Cuba. Then we also have Romardo Lyons, multiple award-winning Jamaican broadcast journalist at Television Jamaica, and a 2024 recipient of the Prime Minister's National Youth Award for Excellence in Journalism. So this is great that we have two perspectives. We're missing just one more. They're going through some technical issues. Hopefully they're able to make it. But the other person that's joining us is Julio Rojas Portal. He's an independent journalist and Havana correspondent for Richard Prince's Journalisms, reporting from inside Cuba despite decades of pressure from state security forces. So really just want to get right into it. I'm going to ask you guys a question, and whatever I missed out, you guys feel free to fill in and introduce a little bit more of yourselves if you like. But for those out there that aren't familiar with what's going on in Cuba, for an American audience that may only know Cuba through Cold War history, travel restrictions, or political talking points, how would you describe what is actually happening in Cuba today? And how has current tensions with the US Trump administration affected the wider Caribbean region, including Jamaica? We can start with Liz.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me today. It's a pleasure for me sharing this panel with these beautiful people. Always, Black people are beautiful. Like the situation in Cuba, the way I describe it is collective punishment. I think like Black people in Black history can relate it to that. I think like, and it have everything to do with the US government, because like the situation that we are going through Cuba right now is not a situation that we were facing. It's like the Cuba where right now I'm living is so different from the Cuba I was born, from the Cuba that I was raised, and I was born and raised and living in Cuba my entire life. So the only thing that is different is the pressure that the US government has put in against my country, and the US policy, of course. I think like we already survived one first term administration, the first term, and then we are facing a second wave. I think like when you open like big media outlets and read about Cuba, we only read about blackouts, about crisis, but about how poor Cuba are, like people are hunger in Cuba, but you never understand the why. Like I don't think like the big media outlets spend enough time to describe the why, and a big part of the why is US sanctions on Cuba. And when I say US sanctions on Cuba, well, US sanctions in Cuba has been in place the entire time of my existence. My mom was born under the sanctions. I was born under the sanction. If I have a child this year or the next, in the near future, the child will be born also under the sanctions. How is it? And this is a question that many people ask because, for example, the blackouts are not new in Cuba. So we are used to have blackouts before. So what is the difference now? Well, now we are facing more than 20 hours blackouts without electricity. And then we have like 2-3 hours with electricity, and then more 20 hours more without electricity. But like, and people talk about, well, this is happening because the United States, the US government is imposing an oil blockade in Cuba since January 29. But the oil blockade didn't start in 2026. I think like the antecedent more close to us is in 2019 when the United States imposed an oil blockade to Cuba and started sanctions the oil tankers who dare to transport oil to Cuba, no matter who is the person or the country who's actually sending the oil. It's just because if you are transporting that oil, you're beyond their US sanctions. So that limited the capacity of Cuba to have access to oil, because we need an oil tanker is expensive. I don't know if you know that, but an oil tanker is expensive. So you hire the person who are selling you oil, and they hire an oil tanker to transport the oil. But if that person says, okay, I'm gonna selling you the oil, but I'm not gonna put my chips on that because then I can use it to do some transactions that I need to do. So Cuba has been forced to use like 1-2 oil tankers that need oil also to transport oil to get into the Cuba. That was starting in 2019. And in Cuba, we call it la coyuntura, Cuban government law euphemism. So we put a name in everything. It's like, this is like just a moment, just for a short period of time. Before of that, we also have blackouts. Why? Because the sanctions limit the capacity of Cuba to have access to spare parts to repair our thermoelectrics, because we have been allowed to have access to new technology, because the sanctions include something that is called the 10%. That means that if a product, raw material, whatever, have 10% of that product is made by the United States or a US company, it's illegal for Cuba to buy them.
So
and then we have also
hold that thought on one second.
Yeah.
So now we're understanding that there's been more limitations due to the Trump administration, and you're saying that when basically, I guess the last time, because we did have a conversation offline, you're saying that things were different from the time that Barack was in office to when Trump transitioned. Could you speak to something just like very specific and maybe personal that someone could experience, like, you know, just getting food or a matter of trying to catch a bus into town? Like, how is that being impacted for just the individual in Cuba?
I will get to have that example through medical and healthcare
Okay.
because I think that that's the most vulnerable one, even for me. I think like at that time we were able to go to a hospital to have like a first hand attention. It was pretty good. Cuba used to produce 60% of the medications that we consume inside of Cuba with Cuban formulations. And now it's none. My mom has cancer, so she needs to go to chemo. And it used to be normal for her just to go to a consultation and have the treatment that she needs. Even when she's an expensive one, the chemo that my mom needs is cost in United States $8,000 a month, and my mom used to receive it for free. And now there is none. Not for her, not for anyone. It's like it's even difficult to get access to chemo, but it's even difficult to have access to acetaminophen. That is a basic thing. So
Right.
now the range of things that is almost impossible for us to get access is everything. And for example, food, and the way that people used to have access to food, the government used to give to the people subsidized food through this rationalized book that we call here in Cuba La Libreta. It wasn't enough, but it was a basic that rice, eggs, oil, I don't know, what the things the people need, basic chicken, meal, powder meal for kids and elders. But now, because the government is defunded, because they don't have any funds, they can't provide that. And now you go to a private small store in the corner of your neighborhood and they are full of stuff, but you don't have the money to buy them. So if I have to describe, I think like Cuba, we used to live in a bubble, but now Cuba is not different from another Latin American Caribbean country that you even can have access to the basic if you don't have the money. That for me,
Wow.
that was the biggest difference.
And now, Romardo, you have a different experience or maybe similar, but what is the relationship like between Jamaica and the US since the Trump administration? And tell us a little bit about what it's like to be in Jamaica for, we might have viewers on this Zoom call now that are, of Jamaican descent. A lot of people here in America, are second generation, third generation Jamaican. So it'd be great to get your perspective on what it is to have those boots on the ground on the island.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. Uh, I'll say that Jamaica and Cuba shared a harmonious relationship for decades, long before I was even born or thought of. And we saw that specifically through the Jamaica-Cuba medical program, which has been happening for 50 years. Well, disturbing breaking news that ended this year. We are approaching 3 months since the end of that program. And we unofficially see where the United States had some level of influence in that decision, which may or may not put our healthcare system in Jamaica, in jeopardy. The decision to end the program came just mere weeks after the U.S. Secretary of State visited Jamaica and described the program as forced labor. He wasn't speaking about the program in Jamaica as in that context. He was just saying overall, and that healthcare professionals were leaving Cuba to go to Jamaica with some very shady, for want of a better word, contractual arrangements. So when we heard that the program was ending in Jamaica, as journalists and even the regular person, they immediately remember that encounter with the Secretary of State in Jamaica. And we made that link. Our Minister of Foreign Affairs, they have sought to move away from that discourse, saying that the US did not influence that decision, and said that both Jamaica and Cuba, they just couldn't come to agreement on new contractual arrangements. But having the program not operating, it's a major blow to our healthcare, system. Our Minister of Health has been trying to form that kind of relationship with other countries to fill that gap, because we have so many issues in healthcare, so many patients need to be treated, but we don't have those numbers in terms of people on the ground to attend to all those people. Up until March 2026, we had over 400 healthcare workers from Cuba in Jamaica. They have been very instrumental in our system, specifically eye care. We have patients, young to old, who've benefited from eye care surgeries and just have had their quality of life improved because of the, contribution from the Cubans. So to hear that the relationship ended, it was just a major blow. And it was important to me as a journalist to try and get the perspective of the people impacted. And that list consists of many, but the two main parties impacted would be the Jamaicans who are seeking care and the Cubans who are providing that care. So I did a special report about 4 parts, and it was so stressful because one, to get those Cuban healthcare workers to speak was like pulling teeth. A lot of them said that, they'd speak to you off the record, but they said that, they were worried, they have to go back home and the situation back, in their homelands wasn't so ideal. So they didn't want to see anything to ruffle any feathers. So they rather, remain silent. But after trying and reaching out to people and offering anonymity and saying, I won't mention your name, I won't show your face, I just want the experience, I was able to speak to 2, and they I'm a bit winded. The the reasonings I got, it kind of tugged at my heart as a young journalist, because these are people who felt as though or feel as though they aren't able to do what they love in their country. And Liz just mentioned it, the difference as it relates to healthcare during the Obama administration versus the Trump administration. They just feel as though they aren't able to provide those medical services. So they saw Jamaica as an outlet to, one, fulfill their passions, and 2, help people. So to have that ripped away from them, it was really hard for them. So yeah, not to go on and on and on, I'll stop here. And just to say, you asked at the inception what word we'd use to describe the current situation with, Cuba and by extension, Jamaica, my country. I didn't come up with a word, but I wrote regional suffocation. It just feels as though the pipeline, the channel to breathe and to help and to live harmoniously as a region is being stifled. So that's my phrase.
Thank you for that, Romardo. I want to go into perspective. And Liz, we touched on it briefly on our call, and I just want to present that to both of you guys, but we'll start with Liz first. Cuba is often explained in 2 incomplete ways. It's either as a country crushed by US policy or as a country suffering under its own government. From your perspective, what does each narrative get right, and what does each one leave out?
I'm going to try to respond to that, and also I'm going to try to link to the response that Romardo already gave. And this is really simple. When we talk about U.S. sanctions and the impact of the U.S. sanctions, some people think that, oh, this is a dispute that the United States and Cuba has, no, right? But it's not. Like the main goal of the sanctions is suffocate, asphyxiate the Cuban people, isolate Cuba, and that's also getting impacted in countries like Romardo. Jamaica is not the only one. It's Barbados, it's Haiti. I'm talking about we can decide, we can have trade with, or what kind of relationship we have with our neighbor, no matter what kind of politics the neighbor chooses. It's like United States needs to decide who is playing with who. And this is important because we are talking about medical missions, and why they're attacking medical missions, why they are trying to avoid that a country like Jamaica, Barbados, and the rest of the Caribbean islands, and also Latin American countries, because Cuba has medical missions around the world, have access to this. What is the problem? It's like this is one of the main source of incomes that Cuba economy has. We have tourism. They kill that. But they try to avoid that all kind of tourism came to Cuba, they start to kill cruise ships to come to Cuba. Then they start to revoke Obama policy on Cuba. Then they try to kill Cuban medical missions around the globe. So of course that Jamaica have to say no to the medical missions. They are losing a big part of the healthcare, but also if they are not doing that, they have a lot of links with the United States that they can just refuse or cancel from a day to another because they have a dependency economy. They depend of the United States in many ways, so they just can cut that. So when you're talking about who is the main responsible, I think like is showing by itself. It's like if the Cuban government is the main responsible, why the U.S. government have to spend so many time and put so many efforts trying to isolate Cuba, trying to suffocate it? If Cuba is a failed state, they're gonna fail by themselves, right? They don't need any help. Why are you trying so hard to try not to cut just your relations with Cuba, but cut all kind of relations that Cuba has with the rest of the world? And also you are making Cuban suffers, but also making Jamaicans and of the Caribbean people suffer too. Because always, like, why the US government is not traveling to to Jamaica to do the service that you are doing? Why? They're paying for it. So why are they not? Because they don't care about this. And when I say they don't care, it's like the medical system, the healthcare system of the United States is not a structure. It's not designed to taking care of the people, to try to prevent that Black people die. And you can see it in Black mortality in women's giving birth in the United States. There is a huge difference with white women in the United States because they don't care. So why they care that actually people in Jamaica receiving that? When I say that it's collective punishment, they are not just punish Cuban people, they are punish the rest of the Caribbean and the global South, because that's the people who are sending the most of the doctors. We are sending doctors to Italy too, Cantabria. We just made a documentary about that. And they have a right-wing government in Cantabria. And the State Department sent someone to talk to the Cantabria government. They say, no, we are not sending back the
I think
Oh,
Liz paused for a second. Romardo, are you connected?
this
yes, right
relationship.
here.
All right, hold on, Liz. We kind of lost you a little bit, but we're going to go to Romardo, and then I'll come back to you on the next question. Just to keep in mind, let's try to keep our answers to about 1 to 2 minutes so that we can keep our conversations going. So Romardo, the same question for you. What is it like right now? Like when it comes to influence from the American government and Jamaica, is there a relationship, and are the people of Jamaica more upset with the American government and their influences, or their own government and maybe some experience of some corruption of some sort? Is there anything that you can chime in and share with us here?
Yeah, I definitely think it's double-folded. On one end, we have Jamaican people who are willing to fall in line with anything the US says because they want to ensure that they have a US visa to come and chase that American dream. We still have people who believe that if it's not Jamaica, it's the United States. So they'd rather our government basically bend over and accept anything as opposed to affecting the possibilities of one getting a visa to migrate and, do whatever they want overseas. And we saw where a lot of people were terrified recently when the US announced the temporary suspension on US immigrant visas. We saw the reaction from the people. So we know how important just having a connection to the United States is to a lot of them. But on the other hand, we have seen pushback from, for example, our opposition. We have the government and we have opposition, and even the regular citizens, there's pushback because people value the decades of harmonious relationships that we were taught about in schools. As I said, I'm just approaching 30 years old, and the Cuba Jamaican medical program has been existing for 50 years. When I was in high school, this is something we were taught about. That was a whole topic in history. We were taught about the importance of the medical program between both countries and how lives were saved and so forth. So we have people who are arguing from that standpoint that we, as a Caribbean region, we can't allow outside forces to come in and dictate what we do or how we engage with our neighbors, our closest neighbors. But that's easier said than done. I mean, the United States is such a superpower, and I don't think any one or two or three Caribbean countries can successfully withstand the impacts or the dictations of the United States. It will definitely take a collective approach, one where I may get some flack for this, but one where regional governments may decide, say, hey, if we stand up against them, this may jeopardize our citizens going to that country. But that's what it will come down to, I think.
You know, I think those are perspectives that we aren't aware of here in the States. And of course, because just as being Black in the States, we have to go through our own kind of like prejudices and issues with government. And, you know, it's just interesting to hear how, I guess, you guys being smaller countries, we would think that there's more unification among you guys. But it's kind of like we're having a similar experience all over the world. If we were a country filled with white people, would we be going through these things? You know, I'm just wondering. But speaking to that, I want to talk about journalism with you guys and how you are experiencing careers in journalism within your countries. Liz, especially, I want to start with you. Cuba is one of those places where every story can be accused of serving somebody's agenda. How do you report honestly when governments, exiles, activists, and international media are all fighting over the narrative?
Well, the first thing is like no strings attached. It's like you can receive money from any corporate organization or government because it's almost impossible to be independent and try to report what you see because it's different. I think that that's the goal of the journalist. I think like, and there is something that I learned from school. It's like, if someone said that it's raining and someone said that it's not raining, your job is not writing down that someone said that it's raining and the other person say that it's not raining. Your job is take your head out of the fucking window, so sorry about the language, and see if actually it's raining or not. And I think like that's the big part of belly of the beast job. We are not reporting one part of the side or another. We are going on the ground, talking to the people and see the real impact of these policies. And I think like I feel really privileged, to be honest, because I actually find a job that I'm passionate about. I love Cuba. I don't want to leave Cuba. And I find a job that is, I feel complete and also allows me to stay in Cuba. Because that's the other thing, like economy. When people talking about like migrants in Cuba, like people in Cuba living and fluent the country, whatever, they are not political migration. This is economical migration, as the rest of the Caribbean and Latin America. People are not leaving Cuba because they don't like Cuba. That's why they come back as soon as they have the possibility, if the U.S. government is not threatening them to cut the resident, the green card or whatever. Is because they go to the United States thinking the American dream that they can feel. And I think like that's the most important part. And for me, and also it's difficult because for example, there's journalists inside of Cuba who are reporting about the atrocities that the Cuban government is committing, but at the same time, they are working for a media outlets who actually receiving funds from the US government. And the siege mentality is real. The siege mentality that the Cuban government is going through is real because the threat is real. They are facing the most biggest superpower around the world, that is the United States, that want to overthrow Cuban government. So if the Cuban government see that you are in some way related to a media who can be related to the US government, you're in danger. But how is being threatened by the Cuban government? And we report on that after July 11 protests in Cuba.
Wait, am I frozen or is it Liz?
Yeah.
Oh, it's Liz.
Yeah, fill in, Romardo. Tell us a little bit more about your experience as a journalist in Jamaica.
Yeah. So obviously it's a different experience because, Jamaica is not Cuba. But one thing I wanted to touch on is how our reports are perceived. And I wanted to make the example of, Liz sitting here on this chat with us. She's literally in Cuba now, and it just looks picture perfect. She's there, she's sitting, and, it's fine. Because a lot of our viewers know that there are people like Liz in Cuba and they're safe and all is well, when we publish or air reports highlighting the negatives, we are often, what's the word, attacked verbally online by people who think we are choosing to highlight the worst or trying to paint a picture that's not entirely true. They often say we exaggerate or we're just trying to drive fear into people. And that's not the case. Two things can happen concurrently. Two things can be true. So yes, Liz is there and they may watch this and see she's able to join and speak with us. But what they don't know is she literally had to download a VPN, change her location so that this call would be possible. So that's something that threatens our journalism because the comments, they I don't want to say they don't affect the reporting. They do. Because if you are reporting something and you're constantly being bombarded by comments, people accusing you of focusing on the negatives, people accusing you of exaggerating, it may affect how some journalists go about, doing certain stories. And as I said at the inception, the response to the journalism as it relates to government push down or pushback rather isn't the same in Jamaica. But where we get a little flack from our government is where we try to go beyond the surface and ask, those tough questions. As I would have said, our Ministry of Foreign Affairs came out and said, hey, the program between Cuba and Jamaica has ended and the US did not influence this decision in any way. Journalists like myself, when we ask, so why, what, how we are sometimes viewed as coming with an agenda, and the people who don't know better, they lean into that narrative. And sometimes it makes the practice feels unsafe. So a lot of reporters, a lot of journalists, they just stick with the surface level reporting. So they'll say the program ended, the government says this is the reason, and it ends there. And when that happens, the real stories and the real voices gets buried. But that's just one of the issues we have to contend with in the region.
I want to get a little deeper on this topic, but I have a question here from one of our viewers. Their name is Bro Frank, and they ask, what type of pressure can be put on CARICOM to aid Cuba?
Wow, that's a
Liz,
tough one. Pressure. I mean, not even just Cuba. We see what's happening with Haiti, but not to deflect. I think, as I said before, it will not take one or two countries. We need all the countries in CARICOM to be on the same page, and we need all of them to be willing to say, hey, we are going to give up XYZ, or people may not be able to go to XYZ if we do this, but we value our relationship with Cuba, we value our relationship with Haiti, we respect the relationship with the Cuban people, so we are going to do this. That's all it will take, but honestly, I don't want to be pessimistic. I don't see that happening. I mean, governments have a responsibility to cater to the needs of the people. And if there are people in Caribbean countries who want to leave Jamaica, Cuba, Barbados, Haiti to go and live in the United States, then if the government does something that goes against that view or that hope or that dream, that will be another issue then in the it right there being developed. So yeah, those are my 2 cents. CARICOM just needs a united front to go full on, but at what cost?
Liz, do you have 2 cents that you could share that you feel that maybe CARICOM has some responsibility, or how do you feel about it?
Well, for me, the responsibility of the question have to be what the people in the inside of the United States have to do, a kind of pressure they can put inside of the United States to try to avoid the US government is pushing against vulnerable countries that form part of CARICOM, because I think like the question have to be the focus on the other side, because as Romardo said, they are too vulnerable right now, and to do actually something, and also to try to organize, and they're afraid of the United States. Like Europe is afraid of Trump and the crazy people. Imagine the countries that belongs to CARICOM. So for me, the question has to be focused inside of the United States, what you can do inside of the United States in order to try to avoid like US interfere in the rest of the Caribbeans that the most of us are coming from, because that's where it happened. Like our homelands has been attacked, that we actually are not doing nothing to help them.
Excellent. I think these are all both really great points. I want to get into race and Blackness within your respective countries. This is a conversation led by Black journalists speaking to a largely Black American and NABJ audience. What should Black Americans understand about race in Cuba, Afro-Cuban life, and the way Black people are either censored or erased in coverage of the islands? Anyone can chime in.
Since it was about Cuba, I'm trying to see if Liz wants to.
So sorry, could you repeat the question, because the connection was broken a little second?
The question is basically, what should Black Americans understand about race in Cuba, Afro-Cuban life, and the way Black people are either censored or erased in the coverage of the island?
Well, the most important part is like Cuba is not a hell and it's not a heaven. There is a lot of gray area. I think like some people look at Cuba, this is a paradise, and some people look at Cuba, this is a hell for Black people, and it's not. I think like we need to remember that Cuba is maybe the only country in the Latin American that have a social revolution, who have in the center also racial justice for Black people. I think that this is important. That's why we became a refugee that give asylum to so many Black people who fought for liberation inside of the United States. But at the same time, I think like people needs to remember that Cuba itself could detach itself from the legacy of racism that come from colonialism. So of course that we have racism in Cuba, and we have to face it, because it also is cultural, become form of the structure of the country. But we need to see it in a context. I always said, I'm a Black woman, I'm not afraid of the police. I feel safe walking around of Cuba. There is not a difference inside of like Black mortality, mothers and white ones. There is no such a thing in Cuba. But at the same time, Black communities are the most vulnerable, are the ones who are suffering the most the consequence of the US sanctions, because they are the bottom of this structure. And they are the most vulnerable people, because one thing that the revolution did, they start like giving social justice to everyone, but not everyone is starting the same line. So there are people that they're left behind. And they recognize themselves. The same government said, we recognize that there are people that we left behind. They don't say the color, but I will say the color. Black people we left behind. So we have a lot of issues that we need to fix. There is not a perfect country, not a paradise for Black people. We have struggles too. But I think like if someone is close to get to some place that is good for Black people to live, Cuba is closer than the United States by far.
Excellent. Romardo, would you like to chime in on your experience just even in Jamaica? Like we do have an understanding that it's a predominantly Black, but what is your experience with race? Or maybe you want to touch on the colorism issue that we spoke about during our conversation. Could you talk about that in reference to the question we just asked Liz?
Yeah, when we spoke earlier, I told you that I didn't think it was necessarily racism that we experience here in Jamaica, because rightfully so, we are predominantly made up of Black people, like myself and even darker. But colorism comes to play in several communities and situations where people believe that the lighter the skin, the better the person in terms of attractiveness, physical appearance, and stuff like that. So we have a lot of people who are growing in and have grown up in some kinds of reasonings and just beliefs that the Black skin is not right. And as a result, we see it's a ongoing issue with the skin bleaching. We have our beautifully Black people, erasing their melanin because of what they were taught, what they see, or what they deem to be beautiful. So we have people bleaching. And it's gotten to a point where health officials are coming out there actively saying that bleaching the skin can be harmful. There are cancers to the skin and yeah, all of that. It's just I just saw a comment from someone I know, so I'm laughing. But yeah, the colorism and there's something we heard a lot growing up. If you're Black, stay back. If you're brown, stick around, and if you're white, you're right. It's it sounds funny, but I'm telling you, a lot of people really, really believe that. And something that just popped up, you give people nicknames. So in Jamaica, a person who is Black, a nickname for them literally be Blacks. So it's like someone's fat, they may say Bigs. But it may seem just like a nickname, but for the people on the receiving end, it leaves a lasting impression and it kinds of
It's
informs how
derogatory in a way.
how they view themselves. Yeah. So not as dramatic as the Cuban experience, but it's definitely present in Jamaica.
Okay, so now I have Julio who couldn't make it to the actual Zoom call, but I have him on the phone. Let me see if I can get him on. Julio, ¿me oyes?
Sí, lo oigo perfectamente.
Ok, te tengo aquí en la llamada. Primero voy a darte una introducción al grupo y hablar de usted y después te voy a hacer una pregunta, ¿ok?
Primero, denle mis saludos a todos. Muy encantado de participar con ellos. Denle mis saludos. Perfecto. Bueno, sigo escuchando.
All right, so Julio, he's lived through the revolution, served in Angola, returned to Cuba that was completely changed, signed the Varela Project, built an independent library, and worked as an independent journalist despite surveillance and repression. When you look at Cuba today, what has changed and what has remained partially the same? Julio, la pregunta es, ha vivido la revolución, sirvió en Angola, regresó a Cuba cuando estaba cambiado y firmaste el proyecto Varela, construyó una biblioteca independiente y trabajó como periodista independiente a pesar de la vigilancia y la represión. Cuando mira a Cuba hoy, ¿qué ha cambiado y qué se ha mantenido dolorosamente igual?
Bueno, dolorosamente, lo que se ha mantenido igual sido en cuanto al periodismo independiente, en cuanto a los movimientos de oposición, la represión y la vista. Es algo que no ha cambiado, no ha cambiado. Es como la pesca, como cuando la persona va a pescar, que tiene el pez, suelta la aguja, recoge el hilo, suelta, y así más o menos se ha mantenido la situación, pero en cuanto a la vigilancia, la represión, cada día es más la vigilancia, cada día es más la represión, no ha cambiado. Hubo un tiempo en que fue más fuerte, tiempo en que fue más fuerte porque no sé si recuerda los hechos de la Primavera Negra del 2003. Ya después de eso, eh, con las administraciones demócratas se han hecho algunas concesiones, algunos cambios. Entonces, en aquellos entonces, el gobernante que era Fidel Castro aprobó algunas cuantas medidas, soltaron a los presos de la primavera del 73. Pero en cuanto a nosotros, por nuestro trabajo como periodistas, bibliotecarios independientes, opositores, la represión y la vigilancia se mantiene tal y como está, y aún peor. Peor porque por cualquier caso de invento, por cualquier tipo de situación, le quieren condenar a uno a 10 años, a 8 años, a 4 años, en dependencia de cómo ellos entiendan, como explicarle ellos entiendan. En mi campaña por África fue joven, cuando pasé el ejército en 1981 1983. No tengo muy buenas, ¿cómo te puedo decir?, experiencia de aquello, porque aquello fue algo un poco traumático para mí por mi juventud. Gracias a Dios pude virar. Muchos que yo vi ahí jóvenes no pudieron virar. Yo entiendo que lo que era campaña es un sueño militar de expandir revoluciones de la aquel entonces gobernante Fidel Castro, cosa que también a la Cuba de hoy eso le costó millones de dólares y ha sumido la economía en un desastre.
Déjame explicar a lo que están oyendo porque muchísimos no saben español. So, dame un segundo. Liz, if you heard any of it, you can also help me translate as well. So what he explained is it's kind of been the same, but actually getting worse. So surveillance and repression has continued on. But what he's seeing is that his experience is now it's tightening up as a journalist. Like now they're paying a larger price for expressing themselves. Some are doing jail time as of 8 years, 10 years, just for expressing whatever goes against the government. Liz, is there anything else that you could chime in from what he said as well?
For me, it's like I'm listening to Julio, and I sound like I'm thinking about the context, and that's put me to like a few minutes ago when I was talking about like the seeds mentality, and people don't say it like it is, but this is a war. Like United States playing a war against Cuba, so it's in a war that like a government as powerful as the United States tries to eliminate.
Okay, Liz, we lost
It's
you, but are you back?
Can you hear me now? Yeah, I'm
Yes, I
here.
can hear
Can
you
you hear
now.
me now? Yeah, I'm talking about like there is a lot of people that are getting trapped in the crossfire. So whatever dissident that is come like an attack direct to the government has sometimes is seen like a threat. There is a specific, I don't know what is the situation of Julio. I don't know what kind of media he is actually working for. But of course that they face that. But as I said at the beginning, it's like this actually he has been doing this, and also he has the freedom to join to this panel and to talk to us. So is right now in the United States with like whatever he's doing work or to trying to speech in favor of Palestine or Gaza, they are being like like receiving represalia from their own government. And this, I'm talking about the United States, that they say that this is the country of the freedom. So you imagine how it is in Cuba. So whatever politics or whatever, and again, I'm talking without know the real context that Julio is talking about, but I think like we need to see in a context.
All right, I'm gonna go back to Julio for 1 second. Hola, Julio, ¿me oyes? ¿Me oyes bien? Ok, no te oímos. Un segundo. All right, ahora te tengo. So, explícame algunas específicas cosas que son, vamos a decir, diferentes en el tratamiento de los jornalistas o noticieros o periodistas de ahora comparado a antes. All right, I lost Julio, but we do have a question here for Liz.
Han habido dos etapas en el periodismo independiente.
Here it is.
Después de la primavera negra del 2003, muchos de ellos fueron puestos en libertad por aquellos acuerdos entre la Iglesia y el régimen cubano. Entonces, la mayoría de ellos partieron hacia el exterior, otros se quedaron ejerciendo el trabajo. Ahora, la diferencia entre aquellos periodistas y nosotros, que en aquellos tiempos era mucho más difícil hacer periodismo. Empezaba lo que era aquí en Cuba la tecnología del internet, aquellas cosas así, y entonces también se nos hacía muy dificultoso a nosotros tener buenos implementos para hacer el periodismo. Para allá, ahora en esta etapa, debido a los adelantos científicos, lo que era la tecnología celular, la internet, el BPM, hacer el trabajo hasta cierto punto se hace más fácil también, y también el problema de la crisis existencial en Cuba, ya las personas, muchas han ido perdiendo la confianza y la credibilidad en el gobierno, y se puede uno acercar a hacer alguna video, a hacer algún trabajo audiovisual. La gente te explica los problemas, las dificultades que tienen. No son todos, pero sí la mayoría. Ya sí ha ido perdiendo el miedo al hablar de las dificultades que tiene el régimen en estos momentos.
Okay, so lo que explicó, what Julio has explained is that before it was difficult to be a journalist because of access, and you couldn't reach as many people, and it was easier for them to just curve journalists from telling the stories that they needed to tell. Now with the advancement of technology and the internet, it's much easier for people to tell the real stories or speak on what's actually going on, but the risks are still the same. Hold on, Julio. We have a question here from one of our callers, from one of our viewers here on the Zoom call. This question is for Liz. Is the community being urged to prepare for the possibility of a U.S. invasion of Cuba? If so, how is that being coordinated?
Well, the first thing is like, there is a topic that people talk about, like, this is a possibility of the United States intervention in Cuba, of course. People are afraid, of course. I don't think like actually people are thinking through too much, because I think like Cubans are too busy trying to survive day by day that they just are not thinking forward. And I think like the government is getting prepared, supposedly. But I don't know, how did you prepare for a U.S. military invasion? It's like we are talking about superpower. We are talking about United States military industry. It's like, of course, I remember that there was, I think like 2 months ago, that people were saying like through the governments and the measures, like you need to have ready a backpack with the things that you need in order that a military attack is happening. But it was like, some people say like you have to have like a dry food and whatever. And I'm thinking about through like poor people don't have access to the normal food. How they're gonna have access to that kind of food?
I think the question comes from, though, is there a sense of urgency? Because you have to understand the media that we see, we feel that Trump can do something
Yeah.
whenever he wants at any given time. So are the Cuban people feeling that kind of tension? Is the government telling people to prepare, or is it something just like, hey, it's just a regular day in Cuba?
I'm so sorry, I'm mute. I think like it's both. I think like the government say like whatever is happening, we need to be prepared, but we are trying to reach peace. We don't have a confrontation, but I don't think like people are really going through this like every day. Like people are not thinking like we need to get prepared because this is just happening inside of US media outlets. Like I receive call with people saying they're attacking now, they're invading now. It's not happening. And I think like people are just trying to survive the day. We are not going through too much. And also it's like, of course, it's the possibility, but it's not happening now. So we need another day to keep going.
Excellent. I have another question here for, I guess, all three of you on the panel. As journalists, how do you build trust with your sources, whether that be doctors, patients, or policymakers, when talking about sensitive but important topics that might feel afraid to speak on? Liz, we've heard, we've heard some of your perspective. Romardo, let me hear if you're having similar experiences in Jamaica, if you speak against government or speak against any type of higher powers, or tell us about any experience that you might have heard of, maybe even in the relationship that Cuba has with Jamaica as well.
Yeah, that's a great question. There are some stories that come with a level of sensitivity. And oftentimes the interviewees, the people at the center of it, they don't even recognize that that's the case. So it's on the journalist's part or end of the bargain to ensure that there's some level of protection. I'll use the same example I mentioned earlier with my story on the end of the Cuba Jamaica medical program. So it was actually called Discharged Cuban Healthcare Workers Leave Jamaica. And it was a talking point for days upon days once it was announced that the program was discontinued. So I set out to find Cuban healthcare workers who were still in Jamaica, who were a part of the program and would have dedicated years of their lives on Jamaican soil, holding up our healthcare system. And as I said earlier, they were very tight-lipped. One of the main concerns they had is if they go back home, they don't want to be in the event that they go back home, they wouldn't want to have they were hoping that they wouldn't have offended anyone, so they didn't want to speak out against their government. They didn't want to say anything against the United States because of the situation that is in Cuba. So how I approach that situation, I'm in broadcast, it's TV, so that would require a sit-down interview, hearing the person speak. But I was very open-minded about that situation. When I reached out to them, I was like, you don't have to speak. I could literally put quotes up on the screen and have someone else say them. I just need the text. I won't say your name. No picture will be shown. Nobody will see your face. And even if it is that they decided to speak, distorting the voices was an option on the table. Luckily, it never got to that point. The two doctors I spoke with, they were comfortable with their voices being used, but it was a case where I made the decision ultimately to not show their faces because I wouldn't want them to end up in any unfavorable circumstances when they get back home, or not just as it relates to the US and Cuba, but what if the program someday, resumes in Jamaica? I wouldn't want them to be exposed, saying anything that would land them in some trouble, and kind of affecting that possibility of them coming back to Jamaica to practice. So definitely to protect the identities of sources, as journalists, we have to focus on the story and the information and not so much the wow factor or the shock factor. Because in this context, having a Cuban sitting talking about the experience on screen and hearing the voices and stuff like that, I mean, that would be something that pull our viewers in. it would make your story go viral or, you know, whatever that's, but in this context, that wasn't what I was after. I just wanted to focus on the voices of the people who were at the center of the situation and not necessarily to look good as a journalist and be, oh, I was one of the first ones in Jamaica to get an interview with a Cuban doctor. No. So we definitely have to take their, you know, privacy and identities into consideration.
Now,
If
Julio
I want to
Melvis,
say something, sorry to add.
go
I'm
ahead,
so
Liz.
sorry, Rafael. I think like this is important because I think like we use freedom of speech against Cuba every time, but we don't use this to other country. And this is part of the narrative that the media outlets is provoking. It's like whatever is happening to United States agent in Cuba because they don't have freedom of speech. So we need to help with that. And I think like this is a huge hypocrisy because all countries have problems with freedom of speech, but that doesn't mean that the country is bad itself. And I think like the way that is portrayed in Cuba is like they use this pretext to put more sanctions to these human rights violations that the Cuban government committed against the people. The United States government used it to justify more sanctions later. So the articles that journalists in Cuba are writing about repression are using by the US government to justify more sanctions who are hurting the people in Cuba more. So this is a circle. I'm creating this problem, big problem inside of it of, oh my God, the United States doesn't have any problem with Israel and human rights violations. And they have problems with Cuba. So this is like a huge double standard and a huge hypocrisy. I'm not saying that it's not wrong. Of course it's wrong. That's not a country that I'm proud of. I'm proud of all the things that Cuba has, but not of that. But it's important to recognize that this has been used to put more pressure against the country. So this is a narrative that they also are feeding, because if you are funding journalists with the US government money, then the journalist has been punished by the US government, the Cuban government, sorry, and then you're writing bad again. It's a cycle.
Now, let me get Julio to chime in, you know, just because of his experience, extensive experience. Julio, ¿me oyes?
Sí, perfectamente.
La pregunta es, ¿cómo tú sabes en cuáles fuentes confiar cuando estás haciendo periodismo?
Bueno, eso, a ver, hay personas que se te acercan con una historia, se te acercan con alguna denuncia. Nosotros siempre tenemos que verificar. Tenemos que verificar la fuente porque tenemos una cosa para nuestro favor, hacer el trabajo. Cuando las personas se acercan con una historia, con alguna denuncia, nosotros primero le hacemos un pequeño video reportaje donde la persona habla del problema que tiene. ¿Ya me entiendes? Y entonces, si la persona accede a hacerlo, una fuente confiable, porque todo lo que nosotros, los periodistas independientes, escribimos es verificado por la policía política y por la seguridad del Estado. Para el hecho de que si en algún momento publicamos alguna mentira, de ellos poder sancionarnos por difamación o por escribir cosas que no son reales. Entonces,
para entenderte, primero para entender, ¿ustedes lo ponen en video para verificar?
Exacto. Nosotros retomamos un pequeño videíto donde ellos nos explican. Si la persona accede a hacerlo, nosotros sí le damos la credibilidad.
Entonces,
Pero
llevan
si
ese video
llevan
ese video a los oficiales.
En caso de que nos arresten porque hayan visto este tipo de trabajo, le decimos persona hablando.
Ok, aguanta, déjame replicar al conjunto, ok? Un segundo.
Sí.
So
Okay.
what he's saying is, when it comes to sources, they do the same as us. We have to verify. So their verification process is they try to record like at least a little video or a little clip of what the person claims or who they are or whatnot, and they take it to the proper authorities to confirm, because they also don't want their credibility to be shot or they don't want to be discredited to the general public with bad information. So they do this kind of verification process so that everyone is just kind of like not coming up to them and, lying about a story. Because there's deeper repercussions as far as credibility and reputation is concerned. Muchas gracias, Julio. Un segundo, aguanta ahí. All right, now we have another question here for Liz. Okay, Liz, the people would like to know, how are you received by Black people in Chicago?
During the tour.
Yeah.
And I think that was a wonderful experience. I think like every city in the United States that I have the privilege to visit, that I was welcomed by Black people, was the most beautiful experience. I think that that's happened. It's like they make you feel like home. And I think like this is something that for me is different. When I talk about the US government, I can distinguish very well about the government and the people. I don't think bad about the people in the United States. I have a really good experience touring around the United States and be welcomed by people in the United States. I think like that's the difference. And I think like in Cuba, we have that clear idea that the people is different from the government. And then also, I have the opportunity to interview people on the streets of Washington, D.C., Black people. I didn't know that was a chocolate city, as I call it. And it was, for me, was really surprise. It was a huge surprise for me to see how clear they were about US policy in Cuba, how it was affecting to Cuban people. I think like it's easier for Black people in the United States to understand that because they can relate how horrible the US government can be because they have experienced that in their own scheme. So there is a kind of empathy. And also, I think like the Cuban's leader has always been more than welcome in the United States by Black communities, for Black communities. So I think that in many ways in history and everything, we are related and connected. So it was a wonderful experience.
All right, we have another question here from the chat, actually. This one is from Elaine, I think her name is. It says, the journalism in Brazil often repeats what US says. How can we build bridges between Black journalists in Brazil and Caribbean? Romardo, you can start this one off.
Whoa, that one is tough. I think that's from my standpoint as someone who is not in like a managerial position, it would definitely be through avenues like this one, networking and, just asking fellow Black journalists in different countries, what are the issues they cover, what are the issues they tackle? Because, for example, let's say there's an issue in Brazil. Where I work, Television Jamaica, we have a relationship with the CNN. So if we aren't able to go to Brazil to cover that event or that issue, we just have to rely on what the CNN has. And it's, just like how we mentioned that the Caribbean countries are much smaller, the journalism inside the Caribbean countries, it's smaller compared to, larger countries. So it's not every event or issue that happens internationally we be able to like get a ticket to go or the accommodation to stay there and cover. But I think with calls like this one, we just have to remain in touch. And if something's happening in Jamaica, I can reach out to Rafael and say, hey, we're having an election and XYZ, and we can just share material. I think that's one of the main ways in which we'd be able to bounce, issues off of each other. Because, Black people cover Black related issues differently. So the CNN with a white reporter may report it differently. Not to say it isn't accurate, but certainly issues that the Black eye will see will not come out through a white reporter. So I think this is one of those, I feel like I'm repeating myself, so this is one of those avenues we can use to ensure that we tell each other's stories properly.
And Liz, have you experienced uh, any similar type of networking where you connected? We know that you have Belly of the Beast, a project that also kind of works with, an American base somehow. What is your relationship like with other Black journalists, from the US and around the world, maybe?
I don't think that I have enough Black relations. I feel sometimes really disconnected. And I feel like a lot of times surrounded of white journalists. Like that's the reality. And that feels like it makes you feel alone. Um, I think like we are not connected enough. That's the real thing. I have another journalist friends, of course, in Latin America, the most of them, that people are doing like journalists, also independent journalism, but it's difficult for us to stay connected. I don't know why. I was the entire time thinking how to collaborate with Romardo about these stories about Cuban medical missions in Jamaica and people leaving, because that's one of the things that we have been reported. We don't have anyone in Jamaica to help us. It's difficult for small media as Belly of the Beast to travel to Jamaica and to do this job. But if we are connected to Romardo, and Romardo have a team that can do the job on the ground, and we have a team in Cuba that can collect interviews with doctors that has been in Jamaica, whatever. And also they have a different relation with me to talk to me because I'm a Cuban than to talk to Romardo. So it's like they react better. And I think like maybe we need to create more spaces like this one. Maybe we need to go through, and this is a project that I'm dreaming about for Belly of the Beast, to try to connect journalists from the global south to stay together and to start to working together. Because maybe we're thinking the problem that is isolated for us, it's just having in Jamaica or it's just having in Cuba, but it's not. It's connecting the dots. And I think like we need to create more spaces because I don't think that we collaborate enough.
So touching on that, interestingly enough, Romardo has a personal experience, being Jamaican and this relationship with Cuba, which is why we have him on the panel today. You're reporting on the Jamaican medical students stranded in Cuba, and Cuban doctors leaving Jamaica gives the conversation a Caribbean lens that Americans rarely hear. What did those stories reveal about how Cuba's crisis is affecting neighboring countries, especially Black Caribbean communities? And how has it affected vulnerable and elderly medical patients in each country, according to TVJ's coverage?
I think one thing covering those stories reinforced to me is that our people are vulnerable more than ever. I mean, we've always been vulnerable, but no, it's like that's why I used the phrase earlier, regionally suffocated. It's almost like the region has I'm a poet, so it's almost as though the region has a neck and the US just has its hands around that neck and is just choking the region. I mean, and it's so multidimensional because we also have Jamaican students who go to Cuba to study. So that shows the quality of the Cuban healthcare system. Or students from Jamaica go there to learn and then come back home and do stuff. So it shows that. Oh, sorry, wait, I was distracted by everything. Wait, am I frozen? Are you hearing me?
I can hear you. We got
Yeah.
you.
So it just reinforces to me that we're so vulnerable, and I lost my train of thought. I wanted to say that. Uh, Oh yeah, how patients have been impacted. So obviously, I'm not really aware of all that's happening in Cuba, but from my standpoint, in the days when it was announced that the program was coming to an end, we were given a date. I think it was March 21st, 2026. And leading up to that time, so many Jamaicans flocked the hospitals, the clinics, the health centers. They wanted to get last minute checks before the Cuban doctors left. And when we went to those places, the lines were so long. People were sitting in the sun, waiting in groups because it just felt like such a huge help was disappearing before their eyes. And as I mentioned earlier, the main way in which, we had Cuban doctors in all aspects of the medical system, but one of the major contributions was eye care. So eye surgeries, cataracts and stuff like that. So we had a lot of elderly people who came out, people in wheelchairs, people walking with sticks, people who had to be moved by other people. I saw an older woman, her grandson brought her there. And they were just questioning what's going to happen now. Because not only were the Cubans so good, extremely good with eye care, their services weren't as expensive. So people are asking questions like, am I going to be able to afford it now? Is it going to be of the same quality? Will I get through sooner or will I have to wait a long time before I'm attended to? So those are some of the things coming to the fore now.
Excellent. Man, I wish we could have more time to dig into that aspect of the conversation. We got two more questions left, and we're gonna wrap up the webinar. But we have a question here from our brothers and sisters at the NAHJ Afro-Latino Task Force, and this comes from Carolina Cruz. What do you guys would like to see Hispanic media in the US and reporters in Spanish news outlets to do, like to help give our audience in the US a better portrait of what's really going on in Cuba and how it impacts other islands in the Caribbean, like Jamaica? Liz, you can chime in if you want.
They need to keep up with the right. It's really the right-wing media outlets in Spanish in the United States. You have to say it. It's like, I don't think like they actually have represented the interest of the Latino people inside of the United States. I don't think that they portrayed us well. I don't think that they are actually portrayed us fairly. I think like, and it's really painful for me. It's like, how is that I'm receiving the most objective, and at least they have the most contrast information from a media that is talking to people in English, but in Spanish it's just right-wing mindset. And I think like, and I understand that because they belongs to a corporation that have like a specific interest inside of the United States. But so I don't think that you can find it in your screen, in your TV programs. I think like to pay attention to what's happening in Latin America and the Caribbean, you need to look forward to journalists as Romardo, who is doing jobs like who is actually reporting what is happening in Jamaica from people inside of the Jamaica. And I think that we need to give up with the big medias in Spanish in the United States and try to find these small media outlets who are reporting, or small independent reporters who are doing the job from inside, because the point of view from the United States to our country is really different.
And Romardo, what do
Yes.
you think? How do you feel about that point of like, what is it that Hispanic media can contribute to these causes here in the US?
Yeah, I definitely agree with what Liz said. But in addition to that, I think a little more about what's coming from the people. So I'm trying a little more so what's coming from the people as opposed to just what government officials are saying. It's just like when we report on climate change. We can't just say the officials are saying that the sea is getting warmer and blah, blah, blah. We need to hear from the people who are affected. The doctors, the citizens, those are the people who essentially drive the messages home. So yeah, I agree with everything Liz said. So that was just an addition.
All right, and just to our final question of the night, I just want to thank you guys in advance. The NABJ is grateful that you guys shared your time with us. The Global Task Force is constantly trying to reach out to the Black diaspora from all over the world and give you guys a voice here and share your perspectives, just so that the journalists here can have an understanding of what's going on in different parts of the world, especially with the way that we all travel and things of that nature. We're not familiar with what's really going on because we don't get to see that view. We only get the view that they want us to see. So I'm very grateful to be able to talk to you guys, and that NABJ is also grateful to have you. My final question, and Julio, I hope you're still there. Perdóname, pero voy a hablar contigo en un segundo. I want to end with a question that is personal, political, and journalistic. What does freedom mean to you now after everything you've seen, reported, lived through, or lost because of Cuba?
Could you repeat it again?
What does freedom mean to you now after everything you've seen, reported, lived through, or lost because of Cuba?
Freedom. I think like for me, freedom is the right to live with dignity and to have access to whatever human beings needs to have access to. I'm talking about public healthcare system who actually taking care of me, public education. I think like having access to culture, sports. I think like the right to dream, the right.
I think we lost you, Liz. Julio, ¿está ahí? Julio.
It's ridiculous because they are saying that you lost me, right?
Yeah, Liz, we lost you for a second. So sorry.
Welcome to Cuba. The internet connection is great.
No, but you're right. To have the right to basic needs, I believe that is freedom to some sense.
Yeah, to have access to healthcare and education and culture and the right to dream. That I actually can become whatever I want to do in the war. I want to become in the war, and that's something that I used to have in Cuba, but I don't have it now. I don't see that the future generations are having that. I think like the United States took us from us.
Now, Julio, ¿me oyes? ¿Está ahí?
Sí.
La pregunta es, ¿qué significa la libertad para usted ahora, después de todo lo que tú has visto, reportado, vivido o perdido por el caso de Cuba?
Bueno, es que la libertad tiene tanto significado para tanta gente. Lo primero es que yo, desde que decidí tomar el camino de hacerme periodista independiente, hacerme opositor, ya yo venía libre en mi mente. Ya había salido de esa ideología, había salido por...
Aguanta, déjame decirle esto a la persona. He says once he became a journalist, he was able to have freedom of the mind. Ahora sigue.
Y entonces fue por los factores porque de mi familia fueron más perjudicados por el régimen. En este caso, lo que he sido yo como opositor, yo tuve un tío preso político, tengo un hermano que falleció producto de represión policial cuando era un adolescente de 17 años. Entonces, esto fue cambiando mi forma de pensar y mi vida.
Un segundo. When he was growing up, he actually had family in government, and I think he mentioned that he also had a cousin that was in law enforcement, and that also changed his perspective. Sigue, Julio.
Y entonces, desde que entré en el camino del periodismo independiente, no ha sido fácil, porque he sido arrestado infinidad de veces. También he recibido golpeaduras y asaltos.
He says that being a journalist wasn't easy because he also had to go through a lot of like heartaches and also even getting beat up for just being a reporter. Sigue.
Como otros colegas que le ha pasado lo mismo, pero cuando ya ellos, en este caso, ven que usted es una persona de determinación, una persona que no va a cambiar, una persona que ya es libre ya, y sigue haciendo el trabajo, un poco como que aflojan hasta cierto punto, pero sí el control, la vigilancia y las amenazas. Porque si utilizan estos métodos para intimidación y para que uno abandone lo que está haciendo, no ha funcionado conmigo. También yo soy una persona de una edad avanzada, y sí me siento libre. La libertad para mí significa que lo que estoy haciendo está bien hecho. Y primero, he sido libre de la doctrina del régimen dentro de lo que me llama, dentro de lo que es mi espíritu. Ahora, en mi forma de pensar, yo soy libre desde hace mucho tiempo. ¿Ya? Y la libertad significa para mí que tengo libertad total de expresión para hacer lo que estoy haciendo y lo voy a seguir haciendo. Voy a seguir haciendo, cueste lo que cueste.
Gracias, Julio.
Sí.
Gracias. What Julio explained, and Liz, I hope I got it right. I don't know if you were able to hear this. I think what he explained was the fact that he has freedom of the mind and he continues to be a journalist and hang in there and have that determination to do what he wants and continue to do what he wants. He already feels free to a certain extent. Liz, is there anything else that I might have missed from what he said?
I don't think so. I think that you get it right.
All right, excellent. And now, Romardo, we get to end it with you. And I know me and you, we had this conversation. So now you had 3-4 days to think about it. What does freedom mean to you now after everything you've seen as a journalist?
In the context of Cuba and Jamaican relations, freedom to me means existing without limitations. And limitations, there are limitations to healthcare, limitations to expression, just limitation to basic needs. And just like Julio, I experienced, some things growing up. I grew up in an inner city community in Jamaica called Tivoli Gardens. Trust me, I would have experienced what was dubbed the Tivoli Gardens incursion. That's when the United States police and soldiers, came to Jamaica to extradite someone who was wanted by the authorities. It was a terrible experience. It's ultimately what pushed me into the direction of journalism, because what I experienced on the ground in the days of gunfire, bombs dropping, people dying, I was literally under a bed with my mother, my niece, my brother crying. We thought we were going to die. My father at the time was trapped in the market. He couldn't come home because of what was happening. People were literally dying and bodies were on the streets. And what I saw on the news, it just lit a fire in me, I guess, as it relates to what news is and what representing the people means, because leading up to that operation, people in the community, we were given the opportunity to leave. But my family was a poor family. There was nowhere for us to go. So we stayed there. And because a lot of people stayed, one of the arguments that was being pushed by the media is that we were in support of this person the United States came for. And it just felt really sad because we were painted as criminal apologists. When really and truly, we were not there to fight, we were not there to support, we were there because that's what we knew as home. We didn't have anywhere else to go. So some of the reports that came out really had me thinking, is this what news is? Is this what journalists do? So in that moment, as a 13-year-old, it became my life mission to tell stories and, give a voice to the powerless. And that has been my entire reason to want to be a journalist. At a very young age, I was always interested in telling stories, but it was more so poetry. But that experience steered me along news reporting, and I'm still in it 16 years later.
Man, amazing story. Guys, thank you once again. Liz Fernandez, co-founder of Belly of the Beast, Romardo Lyons. You can find him at TV Jamaica. And thank you, Julio Rojas Portal, independent journalist for Richard Prince's Journalisms. This ends our webinar today. And I want to thank all of the viewers out there watching. Please look out for another one of our webinars. Contact Kirtiana, Aurora, myself, or any one of us with any kind of feedback of what you'd like to see or what did you like about this webinar today. So thank you guys. And this ends our webinar of Crisis in Cuba.
Thank you, everyone. It was so great. I sent my email in the chat. I really want to connect with other journalists. I forgot to send my number, but we can work that out through email or Instagram. My email and Instagram are there.
No problem.
Okay, thank you everyone for coming. Bye, it was a pleasure.
Take care.
Bye bye.
All right.